This morning, I want to start with a question. Have you ever been scared? Have you ever been scared? We've all been scared, right? Of course you have. Of course I have. We've all been scared before. Because life can be pretty scary. There's scary things about life. And of course there are different, kinds of being scared. Sometimes it's getting news that changes things. A bad health report. Something about your job. Maybe they're phasing your job out. Those things are scary. That's because there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with those kinds of scary situations. You're unsure what that bad health report will mean for your health. You're unsure what this new update to your job or change to your job will mean for your finances. Scary things. There are also other times when something really scary happens, where everything's going fine one minute and then the next, you're in a really scary situation. You know what I'm talking about? Have you been in one of those kinds of situations? It's scary. And I want to share with you a time like that for me. So nearly 22 years ago. And I'll tell you, it's weird to be at an age where you start talking about 20 plus years ago and you're still an adult 20 plus years ago. That's actually more than weird. That's scary to me. So nearly 22 years ago, Christmas time of 2002, Denise and I have been dating for a couple of months. And Denise's sister, she's been dating a friend of mine. That's how Denise and I met. My friend that I worked with started dating her sister, and then they set us up. So we'd all been dating for a couple of months, and we're all getting ready to hang out at Denise's mom's house at Christmas time. And then Denise and her sister, they have plans to do something that afternoon, and so me and my friend go and do something that afternoon. We go to a town that's about 20 minutes away to find something to do. And I don't really remember that afternoon what we did, but we killed a couple of hours, and then it was time to go back to Denise and her sister, their mom's house. And along the way, something really scary happened. As we left to head back, we got onto the highway, onto the on-ramp onto the highway. We merged into traffic, and as soon as we did, we hear this super loud crash behind us. And my friend, he was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and I heard him yell out, "Oh no!" And I turned around to see what had happened, and there was something pretty scary behind us. There was a semi-truck barreling towards us. That wasn't necessarily the scary part. The scary part was that the semi had hit a pickup truck. And this wasn't just like a little tiny Ford Ranger. This was a big truck. This was a 4-door dually truck. So if you know what those trucks are, they're like the ones that have the 4 tires on the back, the big wide fenders on the bed. This was a big truck. And the semi had hit that truck and turned it sideways. And now it was halfway on the grill of this truck, halfway on the road. Sparks are flying everywhere, and it doesn't seem like this semi is slowing down. This semi is coming for us next. And to make matters worse, there was really nowhere for us to go. There were cars in front of us. We couldn't just speed up and zoom away from it. We were actually on a little bridge that covered this little body of water. And if you've spent much time on a highway over a bridge, you know that they don't really make shoulders to get off on. There's just a little bit of space. Not much room to pull over, but we tried to pull over and get out of this truck's way. There wasn't much else of a place for us to go. And I remember my friend pulling off to the side, and as we did, the semi, it starts to pass us. There's just enough room. It actually hits the car in front of us. So now the semi with the truck on front of it has hit another car. We're off to the side, and it's moving towards us, the trailer. And so the trailer, I look over and I see it, and it's coming up. The trailer part in between the tires is coming up onto the side, onto the roof of our car. And it's starting to mash down the hood of it. And it's pushing us towards the edge of this bridge. And now in my mind, there are only 2 options. There's only 2 ways that this can go. It's either going to push us, jam us into the side of this bridge, potentially knock us off of this bridge, over the bridge, or the tires at the back of the trailer are going to roll up onto our car and smash us. That's what seems like the 2 options are in that really scary moment. But then there was Jesus. But then there was Jesus. Aren't you glad there's those moments that where it seems like the worst is getting ready to happen, and then there was Jesus? When you're all out of options, and then there was Jesus, because what looked like the worst was about to happen. We're either getting pushed off of this bridge or getting rolled over top of us by a semi. It seemed like those were the only two options. Then Jesus stopped everything. The semi, what felt like out of nowhere, just stopped. As the trailer was mashing down the driver's side roof of the car, as it was pushing us closer and closer to the bridge, to the edge of it. As the back tires were getting closer and closer, and I was getting more scared and more scared, everything stopped. The chaos stopped. Everything was still. Everything was calm. My heart was racing. It was jumping out. My mind was racing. But there was peace. Neither one of us were hurt at all. There was just enough room to open up the passenger side door just a little bit for us to get out. And to me, it's crazy that all this probably happened in less than a minute or two. Because up to that point, everything was going great. It had been a great day. It was Christmas time. I've been able to hang out with a friend, and we were headed back to see our new girlfriends. Well, what's better than that? It was an awesome day. And everything changed. Everything got scary. Everything looked and felt in that situation, in that moment, it just felt hopeless. But then there was Jesus. You see, Jesus is the bringer of hope. Jesus is the bringer of hope. He brings hope. He brings hope to every single situation, every single area, every single aspect of our lives. Jesus brings hope. He offers us his hope. It's just that sometimes in our lives, if we aren't careful, we can miss it. Times where we overlook it, we don't recognize it, or sometimes we even just dismiss it. You see, the scary situations of life, the scary moments, ones where everything, it seems to be going right in our lives, and then in the next moment, everything is changed. Things have gotten scary. The question then becomes, how will you react? What will your reaction be in that moment? What will your response be? Because remember, we've talked a little bit about this. Reaction and response are two different things. Talked about that last week. In super scary moments, it feels like you can't really help but react, because those moments happen really fast, right? There's not time sometimes to step away and assess the entire situation and decide on just the perfect response. Time just isn't there for that. But you'll react. You'll operate, whether it's for a couple of minutes or a while, you'll operate out of a place of reaction. And then later you'll have a chance to kind of respond to the situation. And Jesus, he's the bringer of hope. And this morning, I want us to look at a passage that depicts a pretty scary scene, a scary situation, and weaves in the hope of Jesus. So let's look together at Mark chapter 4. We're going to look at Mark 4, verses 35 through 41. Mark 4, 35 through 41. It says, on that day when evening had come, he told them, this is Jesus speaking, let's cross over to the other side of the sea. So they left the crowd, took him along since he was in the boat, and other boats were with them. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. He was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. So they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die? And Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Silence, be still. The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And then he said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified, asked one another, Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. In this sermon series, Imitators of God, one of the things that we've done is dig into the context that surrounds the passages that we've looked at each week. The context for this passage, found again in Mark chapter 4, is just prior to that, we've seen Jesus teaching. He's been teaching people. He's been teaching his disciples. He's been teaching, speaking in parables. He's been giving these stories with a lesson in them. And in Mark 4, he gives some of the more well-known parables, the parable of the sower, the parable of the mustard seed. And now at the end of the teaching, Jesus, he tells his disciples that they're going to go on a trip. They're going to cross to the other side of the sea. They're going to get in this boat. They're going to go to the other side of the sea. What's on the other side of the sea? Why do they need to go? Well, the disciples don't know this yet, but there are people over there, people who need Jesus. There's a demon-possessed man over there, filled with a legion of demons. There's a group of people who have cast this man out of their community. There's people who need Jesus at the other side of this sea. People who need Jesus to get to them. But there's this sea in between, the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee, this would have been, at its width, would have been about 10, 13 miles, somewhere in that range across. So this wouldn't have been an easy trip. Not a short trip. And one that would be more complicated to take at night. But here's the thing. When Jesus says that it's time, it's time. When Jesus says that it's time, it's time. Look at the end of verse 35 and the beginning of verse 36 again. He told them, let's cross over to the other side of the sea. So they left. Jesus told them, it's time for us to go to the other side of the sea. So they left. And I think if I had been there, I probably would have had a much different response than the disciples did. Because my first thought would have been, why don't we leave in the morning? Why don't we go home, get some rest? It's been a long day. We're tired. It's a long trip over there. It's going to be more of a dangerous trip at night. Why don't we leave in the morning? And all of those things, I think they make sense, right? All those things would have been true. And that's where we as Christians and even as churches, we can get off track. We can get off course because we like to be practical. We like to look at the whole situation and determine that we know what's best. The problem is that we think we can see the whole situation, but we can't. We think we know what'll be best, but we don't. Because when Jesus says that it's time, then it's time. When Jesus says it's time to move, it's time to move. When he says it's time to go, it's time to go. Are you ready to move? Are you ready to go? Because that's one of the requirements of being a follower of Jesus, of being his disciple. When he says it's time, it's time. When he says it's time to change something, it's time to change it. When he tells you it's time to do something, it's time to do it right then. But we often think we know what's best. We think we can see everything, that we know the whole picture. But we can't. We can't see the whole picture. We don't know what's best. That's why the Bible tells us we can't lean onto our own understanding. Because my understanding probably would have kept me off of that boat. When Jesus says it's time, it's time. Are you ready for that? Because there's a lot going on in this passage. There's the big scene of the storm and the miracle of Jesus calming it. But one of the biggest things I think that we can't miss is that the disciples followed Jesus onto the boat at a time when it wouldn't have made sense. At a time when it would have made way more sense to try to convince Jesus to wait. And that's a danger that we have to be on guard against, telling Jesus to wait. Do we tell him to wait in those terms usually? Do we say, Jesus, you're just going to have to wait? Not usually. But instead, what we do is we put off the things that Jesus has told us to do. We put off putting into action the things that he's taught us, putting into action his commands. But we can't be a people and we can't be a church that puts off what Jesus tells us to do. We can't dismiss what he tells us to do. We can't put off what he tells us to do. And that's because we don't want to miss what he wants to do. You don't want to miss what Jesus wants to do. And that's exactly what happens when we stay put. When we work out of our own understanding. When we don't do something when he tells us to do it. Because what happens is then we miss what he wants to do. And when we do that, when we miss what Jesus wants to do, we miss out greatly. And I don't want you to miss out on he wants to do in your life. You don't want to miss out what he wants to do in your life. You don't want to miss out on what he wants you to experience with him. You don't want to miss out on what he wants you to learn about him. You don't want to miss out on how he wants to change not just your situation, but your relationship with him. Don't miss that. Don't miss that. You know, that's one of the things I say just about every week in our response time at the end of our service. I say, don't miss what he has for you right now. And I don't say it out of a hope that it'll drive more and more people to the altar. Instead, I say it because I believe it. I believe that there are times when God puts something in front of us and says, listen, the boat's leaving. Are you coming with me? Are you getting on the boat? Because we're leaving right now. I know it doesn't make much sense to leave right now, but we're leaving right now. Are you staying or are you coming with me? And there are times when that opportunity to experience God in a whole new way won't come along again. Don't miss what he wants don't miss what he wants for you by determining that, you know what, the time just isn't right for me right now. Of course the time is right. If Jesus has determined that the time is right, who are we to say otherwise, right? Of course the time is right. You're just unsure. Maybe a little scared about what he's putting in front of you. Maybe a lot scared about what he's asking you to do or change. But know that the time is right. And with that, know that that time will also pass. The boat will leave. And if you aren't on it with Jesus, then you'll miss something. You'll miss something special that he has for you. You'll miss seeing him in a whole new way and understanding him better, learning to trust him more. Don't miss it. Don't miss the boat. It's leaving. But it's also leaving at a time that won't make much sense. And there's a reason for that. What's the reason? Let's read more from this passage. Let's go back to verse 37. It says, a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. Remember what I just said. I said, don't miss the boat. The boat's leaving, and it's also leaving at a time that doesn't make much sense. Jesus, he told them they were getting into the boat at night to cross the sea to go 13 miles or so at night. None of it made sense. They didn't know why any of it was happening, but they went with him. I like to think, there's a good chance I wouldn't have gone, but I like to think that eventually I would have stepped on the boat. I would have gone with them too, that if I was there, even though I had my doubts and my common sense was telling me it wasn't a good idea, I would have eventually gotten on the boat before it left. Again, the time that doesn't make sense, unsure about where we're going. And then what happens? Well, the exact thing that I was scared of, the exact thing that I would have been scared was going to happen, happened. The world's worst storm happens. Now, the translation that I read out of this morning says there was a great windstorm. I want to put that into perspective for a second. The Greek words that this would have originally been written in would read like this to describe the storm. Megas, the lapis, anemos. Megas is where we get our word mega from. This storm was massive. It was loud. It was furious. It was violent and intense. Those are all derivatives of that original word megas. And then the lapis and nemos, that could be used to describe hurricane-type winds in this storm. And I'm pointing all of this out to drive home the fact that this was not just some ordinary storm. This is a storm like none of these men had ever experienced, ever. And these are the men who followed Jesus onto the boat at the time that he told them to. When Jesus calls you, when he calls you to follow him, when he calls you to change something, when he calls you to go somewhere, his expectation is you do it when he says to do it. That's his expectation. What should your expectation then be? Well, you can expect for there to be a storm. You can expect for there to be a storm. In fact, you should expect for there to be a massive storm. I think oftentimes this is one of the things that we get backwards as Christians. We tend to think that when something goes smoothly, it represents that this is what was meant to be, that it's proof that God wanted you to do it. And then when things don't go smoothly, when things get tough, we wonder, God, why are you punishing me? And the problem with that logic is that the viewpoint is all wrong. Because when we view God's plans, his will for our lives as not just being good and pleasing and perfect, but when we view it as being smooth and painless and easy, what we do is we look at God's plan through our human eyes. We can't view God through our human eyes, because our human eyes will view God, the things that he's doing, the things that he's asking of us, and they'll doubt. Our human eyes will be scared. Our human eyes will cast blame. Jesus, his disciple, Thomas, after Jesus had been raised from the grave, he doubted Jesus. The disciples in our story here were scared on the boat. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, blamed Jesus for not being there in time to save their brother. Our human eyes, our human hearts. We can't view God through our human eyes, because when we do that, we put him into a box that says, when I'm good, good things will happen. When I'm bad, bad things will happen. Kind of how we reward or discipline our kids, right? You do good things will happen. You do bad things are going to happen. There'll be a punishment. And there are some similarities there between how we work and how God works, but we also need to understand Matthew 5:45 that says, so that you may be children of God in heaven, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Those are words of Jesus to God's children. Words of Jesus that tell us to expect the rain, to expect the storm. And the storm came for the disciples that night. A great storm. A storm unlike anything that they had ever seen. And these were men. Most of these men had spent a lot of time on that exact sea, in the boat. As fishermen. And these men were scared. Verse 38 says, so they woke Jesus up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die? So remember, picture this. You follow Jesus onto the boat. You make changes in your life. You leave behind the things that he's told you to leave behind. And then the storm comes. The big storm comes. A storm that's bigger and badder than anything you've experienced. See, in this passage, there's something there we got to make sure we don't miss. Again, these are former fishermen in a boat that they've been on hundreds of times, in a body of water that they've been on hundreds of times. The setting is the same for them. They're used to being on a boat on this sea. They're used to being on a boat on the sea at night. The setting's the same for them. They were in a place that they were used to. And then the biggest storm that they've ever experienced came. Big storms happen in familiar places. The big storms in life, our lives, happen in familiar places. They happen with our kids. They happen with our spouses, with our jobs, our finances, our health. And they show up in what can feel like just out of nowhere. And in those times where everything, 1 minute's feeling like it's all going great, it's going smoothly. And then boom, a semi-truck is right behind you and it feels like it's going to push you off the side of a bridge or run you over. Never saw it coming. It just happened out of nowhere. And now I'm scared and now I'm unsure what to do. Everything around me is out of control and I feel completely helpless. Just like these disciples did in the boat. The ones who did what Jesus told them to do, right? When he told them to do it. And now a storm? Not only that, a massive storm. What did they do to deserve this? They were obedient. They followed Jesus. They listened to him and followed him onto the boat. And that boat led them straight into a storm. You see, our obedience to God will unsettle some things in our lives. You'll have people in your life who won't be able to stand your obedience to God. Can't stand the changes that you're making. Can't stand the things that you now desire as his follower instead of what you used to desire. Can't stand that you're now a devoted follower of Jesus instead of who you used to be. You have an enemy in this life who can't stand it either. So he does what he does. He brings a storm into your life. Again, your kids, your spouse, your job, your finances, your health. And what do you do? What do we so often do? We run to Jesus and say, what did I do to deserve this? I've been following you, and now everything's just 10 times worse than it was before. Don't you even care that it feels like I'm about to die? That's what the disciples did, right? It's what we usually do. And here's the significance of that. Here's why it matters so much when we react like the disciples reacted. What it's saying when we react like that, it's saying, you know what, God, there's just no hope. The worst has happened. I'm going to die. When you react out of fear, you eliminate hope. When you react out of your fear then eliminates any chance of hope. And if Jesus is all about hope, then when we react out of fear, what we're doing is we're eliminating Jesus. When we think we don't deserve the storm that we're going through, we eliminate Jesus. When we think nothing can change in our situation, we're eliminating Jesus. When we view Jesus through our human set of eyes, we eliminate Jesus. You see, we have to view Jesus through our spiritual eyes. The disciples didn't view Jesus in that moment through spiritual eyes. They looked at him with their human eyes and determined we're all doomed. Because the only reason they went to Jesus was out of a sense of anger and almost disgust that he was asleep, and they were convinced they were all about to die, Jesus included. They were convinced this was the end for all of them. They weren't waking him up in hopes that he would do a miracle. They woke him up because they thought all of them were going to die. They'd eliminated the hope of Jesus, and Jesus was right there with them. Sometimes we're in the middle of our storms, the storms of life, sitting in church, around the things of Jesus, hearing the things of Jesus and about Jesus, and yet we eliminate the hope of Jesus. We dismiss it. We sit here and we feel sorry for ourselves and what we're going through. We get angry about our situation, about the storm. Believe that we don't deserve it, that it should be different. That all the problems just started once I started following Jesus, and it shouldn't be like that. You have to be careful. Don't view Jesus through your human eyes. Instead, view him through the spiritual eyes that he wants to give you. You see, there's a really interesting piece to one of the verses in this passage. Verse 38 tells us where Jesus was at and what he was doing in this storm. He was in the stern of the boat, so he's in the back of the boat. We know that he's asleep, right? There's something you might have missed in this story. Let's read the first part of verse 38 again. It says, he was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. And what that tells me is Jesus was really comfortable. He found a pillow. He'd gotten comfortable and he'd gone to sleep. He had settled in. He hadn't just happened to fall asleep and take a quick nap. He had gotten comfortable. Found this comfy little cushion, using it as a pillow, and he was sleeping good in the middle of this massive storm. And here's what I think we often miss in this passage, in this story. Jesus is comfortable in our storms. In the storms of life, Jesus is comfortable. He's at peace in our storms, in the middle of them, at their worst. During a storm unlike anything you've ever gone through, Jesus is comfortable and he's at peace. And his expectation is that you are too. That's how we imitate him. We allow him to bring peace to us in the middle of our greatest storms. That's viewing Jesus through spiritual eyes. Seeing him asleep isn't seeing him as one who doesn't care about your situation. Seeing him asleep on the boat in the middle of the storm isn't seeing him as turning his back on you. Seeing him asleep doesn't mean that he doesn't know all about the storm that's raging in your life. When you see him asleep in the middle of your storm and you choose to see him through your spiritual eyes instead of your human eyes, you'll see your Savior at peace. And here's why he's at peace. There's no storm in this life that he's not in control of. And that's what he wants you to understand so badly. He wants us to hear those words, that there's no storm in your life that he's not in control of. To hear those words, and not just to hear them, but to be changed by them. And then to go and live your life by those words. He's saying, there's nothing to be scared of. There's nothing to fear. There's nothing to be anxious about. He's saying, I'm in control. God is in control. He's at peace. And he wants that peace for you too. It's why Jesus, after he performed the miracle of calming the storm, of calming the wind and the waves, then said to his disciples, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Denise, if you would come in our time of response. In your relationship with Jesus, whatever that looks like, wherever that's at, as it's growing, because relationships are meant to grow, right? Number one, what I would challenge you with is don't be afraid to get on the boat with Jesus. Get on the boat because there's something there for you. There's something he wants to do for you. Get on the boat. When he says it's time, it's time. But be prepared. Because what will happen next, there will probably be a storm. And it'll probably be a really big storm. But we serve a really big God. There's something special that he wants to do for you in that storm. So don't be afraid of the storm. If you would stand with me. Again, this time of response. I think the challenge for us is to be as imitators of God. Are you at peace in the storm? Whatever it is that you might be going through, are you at peace? Do you have the peace that only Jesus can bring? Or are you feeling doubt? Are you scared? Are you anxious, depressed, nervous, ready to get off the boat, wishing you had never got on the boat in the first place? You see, the disciples, they were scared. They were right there with Jesus. They went and they woke him up. And they said, aren't you worried? We're about to die. Don't you realize this? What Jesus did next for them, they got to experience him in a whole new way. They got to experience him as not just a friend and a teacher and one who would do miracles for people, but one who had control over the wind and the waves. There's not a storm in your life that God's not in complete control over. Lord, this morning, in this time of response, Father, my hope and my prayer is that each one of us here would come to you and say, Father, what are you speaking to me? What are you revealing to me? What are you asking me to do? Are you asking me to get on the boat with you? Are you asking me to hand something over to you that I've not been willing to so far? Are you asking me to change some things? Are you asking me to be more devoted to you? My relationship with you? Are you asking me to go and tell others about you, but it makes me nervous, I'm scared. I don't know how they'll react or respond. Maybe we have folks here who are ready to jump out of the boat and be done. Are you asking of them to hold on just a little bit longer? But the next stop is getting to see you do a miracle in their lives. Getting to experience you in a whole new way. Lord, whatever it is that you have for us this morning, Father, I pray that you help us to not miss it. Help us to not walk away. Help us to not put it off. But to say the time right now is the time that you're saying it's time. So folks, over these next few moments, Denise is playing and singing. If there's anything that you need prayer for, the altar's open. We'll pray with you.